Lifelong criminal Shanquise Franklin was arrested in April of 2025 for the cold case murder of Dothan businesswoman Grayson Bridges Dettert, just days after being released from an Alabama prison. He was only a teenager in March of 2010 when 69-year-old Dettert was killed at her used furniture store. The perpetrator shot Dettert in the abdomen, ransacked the store for money, and left her to die as she tried to call for help. Police were surprised that no witnesses came forward from the typically busy area. After 15 years with no answers, investigators were both surprised and pleased to finally uncover the details needed to make an arrest. A law enforcement spokesperson did not specify what new findings led to the charges against Franklin, who is currently being held without bond. In 1978, high school teacher Diane Peterson was stabbed to death at the very school where she taught in San Jose, California. Over the years, police investigated various suspects but never found enough concrete evidence to file charges. One of these suspects was a teenage student named Harry Nicky Nickerson, who was finally confirmed as Peterson's killer in June of 2025. The breakthrough came when a relative of Nickerson admitted that the young man had confessed to the murder within minutes of committing it. This relative, who had kept the secret for 50 years, reportedly seemed relieved to unburden themselves. Prosecutors declined to charge the family member, believing their silence was motivated by a fear of retaliation. Between Peterson's murder and his own death in 1993, Nickerson amassed an extensive criminal record, including convictions for armed robbery and kidnapping. While he cannot be brought to justice now, law enforcement considers the closure of the case a success. In April of 1985, the remains of a young man were discovered in an undeveloped area of Menlo Park, California. The deceased remained unidentified until May of 2025, when authorities announced the remains belonged to 20-year-old Brian Edward Jones. Jones had last been seen in December of 1984, leaving his family's home for work. Efforts to identify him were revived in 2023 when his bones were exhumed for DNA testing. A sample entered into the CODIS database connected to a relative who had also gone missing years later. Further genetic genealogy work led to the positive identification of Jones as the Menlo Park John Doe. His cause of death is still unclear, and authorities have not speculated on whether foul play was involved. In late November of 1993, the body of an elderly man was discovered floating under the Clearwater Pass Bridge in Pinellas County, Florida. Dubbed the Pinellas County John Doe, he was estimated to be between 60 and 80 years old. His clothes were found neatly folded by a lifeguard stand, and an autopsy deemed the cause of death inconclusive, with no signs of foul play. The man's identity was a mystery for decades, until the case was taken up by a nonprofit volunteer group called Moxie Forensic Investigations. Collaborating with local police, they sent samples of the man's bone dust for DNA testing. The results led them to a potential family member who is now 94 years old. A DNA sample from this relative confirmed that the John Doe was 84-year-old Edmund Eric Gleed of Fairfax County, Virginia. While it is unclear why Gleed traveled to Florida, the identification has provided a measure of closure for his son, who spent 30 years wondering about his father's fate. For 51 years, the family and friends of University of Utah student Douglas Brick lived with the uncertainty of his disappearance. The 23-year-old vanished without a trace in October of 1973, leaving investigators with very little information to proceed with. In May of 2023, weathered human skull fragments were found in the foothills near the university. DNA testing showed a 99.9% probability that the remains were Brick's stasio. His family, who had long pushed for the case to be reopened as DNA technology advanced, was relieved to finally have answers. Their efforts were crucial, especially since official records of Brick's disappearance had been lost for at least 20 years. The case gained momentum after detectives learned Brick's sister had sought an update in 2018, which enabled them to collect a vital DNA sample. Lingering questions, including the cause of Brick's death, still remain. 20-year-old Roseanne Sturtz was found murdered on a roadside in Columbia, Maryland in 1975. Investigators suspected serial killer Charles William Davis Jr. was responsible, but when shown a photograph of her in 1981, he did not recognize her. In 2022, a detective reviewing the case showed Davis a different photo of Sturtz, and this time he recognized her as one of his victims. At that point, he was already serving 3 life sentences plus 45 years for other murders. Davis confessed that he and Sturtz had met at a bar, and an argument between them escalated into physical violence, during which he strangled her to death. Because Davis had been granted immunity in 1980 in exchange for information on the case, he will not face charges for her murder, but his other convictions ensure he will remain incarcerated for life. While responding to a report in February of 2005, police in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, found the murdered body of taxi driver Muird Hussain. He had disappeared while driving 3 men from Brooklyn, New York to Enfield. For reasons that remain unknown, he exited the highway early in Windsor Locks. Detectives identified 3 Pakistani nationals as the primary suspects, but the investigation stalled. A major development occurred in 2024 when police reopened the case and tested Hussain's clothing for trace DNA. Advancements in technology allowed them to extract a profile belonging to a 38-year-old Ohio man named Muhammad Ali. In April of 2025, Ali was arrested and extradited to Connecticut, where he now faces charges of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to murder. In late March of 1996, Susan Cugnas was found bludgeoned to death inside her Pierce County, Washington home. Her teenage son, Jeffrey Cugnas, was missing. He was later spotted in the passenger seat of his mother's car, driven by the family's handyman, Martin Malcolm. After Malcolm took him for a haircut, Jeffrey was never seen again. Malcolm, who had previously served 12 years in prison for the 1980 stabbing death of his wife, immediately became a suspect. However, authorities lacked enough evidence to charge him in connection with Jeffrey's disappearance. A significant breakthrough came in 2017 when mushroom pickers discovered a fragment of a teenage boy's skull that showed evidence of blunt force trauma. In 2020, DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Jeffrey. A further search of the area uncovered clothing items belonging to the missing teen. Investigators began building a case against Malcolm, only to discover he had passed away in 2022 at the age of 67. In early 2025, detectives from the Elgin, Illinois Police Department's Cold Case Unit launched a podcast titled Somebody Knows Something to Help Solve Cold Cases, including the disappearance of Karen Scheepers. Scheepers had vanished in April of 1983 after leaving a Chicago bar. Just weeks after the episode about her case aired, tips began pouring in to law enforcement. Acting on this new information, police located Scheepers' car, submerged in the Fox River, about 6 miles from where she was last seen over 42 years earlier. Inside, they recovered her skeletal remains and several personal belongings, including a birthstone ring and part of her high school graduation cap, which were returned to her 90-year-old mother. While the discovery provided answers much faster than expected, police continued to air podcast episodes about the case. On November 16, 1990, 32-year-old Maria Weidhofer went for a run in California's Tilden Regional Park and did not return. Her body was found the next day near a trail with a rope around her neck. Despite investigators' efforts, the case went unsolved. DNA testing on evidence began in 1997, but the technology was not advanced enough to yield conclusive results until the FBI joined the investigation in 2020. The case reached a surprising resolution nearly 35 years later, in February of 2025, when authorities identified John Leary, a man from Gold Beach, Oregon, as Weidhofer's killer. Leary had passed away just months before his identification. He had lived near Weidhofer and was in his mid-30s at the time of the murder, but had no violent criminal record at the time of his death. With no suspect to prosecute, the case is now considered closed.
One ordinary evening, a woman left work and disappeared into thin air under circumstances that quickly began to seem anything but ordinary. The police launched an investigation and soon unearthed a series of disturbing clues that pointed to something far more sinister. But despite their early momentum, the case would remain unsolved for a staggering 25 years until an unforeseen twist finally brought long-awaited answers. Kim Langwell was born on the 24th of December, 1965, in Houston, Texas. She grew up there with her parents and younger sister, in a warm circle of friends who always admired her fierce determination. That drive only grew stronger when, at 18, Kim became a mother to her daughter, Tiffany. Shortly after Tiffany's birth, her father left, leaving Kim to raise her child alone. Determined to create a better future, Kim relocated to the small town of Beaumont, hoping for a fresh start. Life was difficult at first. Kim often worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time to support herself and her daughter, but with time and relentless effort, she secured a solid position at a nearby oil refinery. The job not only offered stability, it also brought Ken into her life. The two hit it off, began dating, and eventually got engaged, hopeful about the life they were building together. On the 9th of July, 1999, 34-year-old Kim had plans to enjoy dinner at a restaurant with Ken and her 15-year-old daughter. Her workday was expected to end at 5 p.m., giving her enough time to get home and prepare for the outing. Around 5:15, Kim phoned Tiffany to confirm the dinner plans. She mentioned she had a few quick errands and might be running a little late. By 6:30 p.m., Ken had arrived at Kim's home, but there was still no sign of her. He and Tiffany tried calling, but she didn't answer, which was highly unusual. As more time passed with no word, Ken's concern grew. Finally, around 10 p.m., he decided to go looking for her. He retraced the route she would have taken from work to home, made stops at nearby stores, and checked places she might have visited. Nothing. Then he spotted her car parked outside a pharmacy, but Kim was nowhere in sight. He searched the surrounding area, hoping she was nearby, but she wasn't. Initially, Ken tried to rationalize her absence. Maybe she changed her plans. Maybe she met up with a friend and left her car there. It didn't quite add up, but he convinced himself she was okay and returned home. The next morning, Ken drove back to the pharmacy and found the car still sitting there, untouched. Kim hadn't returned home overnight. She hadn't contacted anyone. And now, fear began to replace confusion. Ken called the police. Detectives wasted no time and began with Kim's vehicle. There were no visible signs of foul play inside, no blood, no signs of a struggle. But one discovery stood out. Her cell phone had been left behind. Investigators then spoke with Tiffany, who told them Kim had planned to visit a man named Terry after work. Though they had ended a long-term relationship about 6 months earlier, Kim and Terry had remained in occasional contact. That evening, he had asked her to help him with a small task, holding up shelves while he mounted them. Tiffany recalled calling Terry the night Kim went missing. He said she had only stopped by briefly, then left. But when police began speaking with Kim's friends, they uncovered a troubling history. Early in their relationship, Terry seemed like a good guy, but things quickly changed. He became possessive, demanding to know Kim's whereabouts at all times. He picked fights over minor issues and insisted she obey him. Eventually, Kim had enough and ended the relationship. But leaving Terry wasn't simple. He swung between promises of change and threats of violence. Despite this, Kim managed to break things off, but she never felt completely safe. She continued limited contact with him, fearing what he might do if she cut him off entirely. Friends told police that, shortly before the breakup, Terry had physically assaulted Kim, once choking her during an argument. Afterward, Kim confessed to them that she feared he might one day kill her. In fact, she once half-joked that if she ever vanished, they should check Terry's backyard first. Given this background, and the fact that Kim visited Terry right before disappearing, police turned their focus to him. When questioned, Terry denied any involvement. He maintained that Kim dropped by briefly to help with the shelves and left. He claimed that later that night he went to a local bar. His story gave him no clear alibi during the critical window of time when Kim vanished. Investigators obtained a warrant to search his property, but they came up empty. No sign of Kim, no suspicious evidence, nothing to confirm their growing suspicions. Forensic experts combed through Kim's car too, but again, nothing surfaced. Then another name entered the picture: Frank, Kim's boss at the refinery. According to Kim's friends, Frank had been harassing her for months. He was married, but that didn't stop him from pursuing her. He wrote her over 100 letters expressing his feelings, hoping she'd reciprocate. But Kim didn't. She felt uncomfortable, even frightened. Fearing things might escalate, she gave the letters to her friends for safekeeping in case anything ever happened to her. She told them Frank had taken to slowly driving past her house, sometimes parking across the street and watching from his car. Oddly, Frank's creepy behavior didn't change even though he knew Kim was in a relationship with Ken, who also worked at the refinery. When police interviewed Frank, he played down everything. He claimed he barely had any feelings for Kim and denied ever writing her letters, despite investigators holding the letters in their hands. Frank also tried to establish an alibi, producing a store receipt from 6:56 p.m. and pointing to a poker game he hosted later that evening. But there was still a significant gap, over an hour, between when Kim left work and when his alibi began. Still, there was no hard evidence connecting Frank to the disappearance. Police tried to trace Kim's final movements using surveillance footage and phone records, but came up short. The last known activity was her call to Tiffany. Meanwhile, volunteers joined massive search efforts across the city. Flyers were posted, news outlets reported the story, and the public was asked for tips, but nothing broke the case. Suspicions around Terry only deepened. Kim's sister paid him a visit shortly after the disappearance, and Terry showed no concern at all. He even mocked her and the rest of Kim's family. His employees added another layer of concern. One recalled seeing Kim's car parked at Terry's house around 5:50 p.m. on the day she vanished, contradicting Terry's claim that she only stayed for a few minutes. Later, multiple witnesses reported spotting Terry's tow truck near the pharmacy parking lot around 6:45 p.m., the same place Kim's car was later found. His supposed alibi didn't hold up. Even so, police lacked physical proof. Terry's behavior grew more alarming. He once told Kim's sister he was going to take a polygraph test, then casually added, "I'll probably fail it." He called the family now and then, pretending to check in, asking if they'd heard from Kim, as if she had simply taken a trip. Anonymous, silent phone calls plagued the family for years, which they believed came from Terry. 3 years after Kim disappeared, he approached Tiffany on the street and brought up the polygraph again, taunting her with a chilling comment. "Want to know which question I failed? It was the one about whether I killed your mom." Despite this, police still couldn't pin anything on him. The case went cold. 8 years later, detectives revisited it, starting from scratch. But Terry had stopped cooperating and refused to talk further. Then came a turning point. In early 2024, the Oxygen True Crime team began working on a documentary about Kim's case. They re-interviewed everyone, family, friends, and the suspects. Frank agreed to speak but stuck to his old denials, refusing to admit to anything, even the letters. Terry, however, refused to cooperate, so the crew paid him a surprise visit. Upon seeing them through a window, he fled out the back door and jumped into his car, attempting to drive away. The crew blocked his path. Cornered, Terry said he wasn't trying to flee and insisted once again that he had no reason to harm Kim. But his story had changed. He now claimed Kim came by to pick up belongings, not to help with shelves, as he had said before. That inconsistency caught investigators' attention. The case was reopened. Shortly after the documentary aired, prosecutors began preparing to charge Terry with murder. They still didn't have direct physical evidence, but public interest had rekindled momentum. Then came the breakthrough no one saw coming. A witness stepped forward. He said that Terry had once confessed to killing his ex-girlfriend and burying her on his property. With this revelation, police finally secured a warrant to search Terry's land, this time determined to uncover the truth once and for all. For several days, teams of searchers scoured the property using advanced ground-penetrating radar technology. Eventually, they uncovered something critical, a suspicious section beneath the concrete floor of Terry's bedroom, roughly the size of a human body. What stood out was that the rebar in that specific area had been cut away, even though the rest of the foundation was fully reinforced. Investigators began to excavate, and before long, they unearthed a blanket, buried deep beneath the surface. Inside it were human remains. Forensic experts were called in, and soon the truth was confirmed. The remains were Kim's own. Terry was immediately taken into custody and charged with murder. With Kim's body discovered directly beneath his room, prosecutors finally had the physical evidence They'd long been missing, enough to confidently move toward a conviction. As of now, Terry, who is 67 years old, remains in custody, awaiting trial in the spring of 2025. In addition to the criminal proceedings, Kim's daughter has filed a civil lawsuit against him, aiming not only for justice but also to prevent him from using financial resources to fund his legal defense. Following Terry's arrest, serious questions were raised about the initial investigation. Kim had reportedly told close friends that if anything ever happened to her, they should check Terry's property. And remarkably, 25 years later, that's exactly where her remains were found. It still isn't clear why authorities failed to search the house and surrounding land thoroughly at the time. Perhaps they did examine the yard, but found no signs of disturbed soil. It's also uncertain when Terry hid her body beneath the bedroom. He may have initially stashed her elsewhere and moved her later after police wrapped up their initial search. Whatever the case, it now seems unlikely that Terry will avoid accountability, and at long last, Kim's loved ones have been able to lay her to rest with dignity.